Hi, everyone. My name is Kenya Hamid, and I'm a neuropsychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources we have available for families during the coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting childmind.org/coronavirus. Today, I'd like to talk about communicating with teachers during COVID-19. This is going to be my part two, and answer your questions about that and anything else you're wondering about. Post your questions in the feed. We'll also post some links to helpful resources on childmind.org and the details about the next Facebook Live. Remember, we're here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30, and we look through your questions daily. All right, so as usual, we have some questions that have already been submitted. So I'm going to start with those, and then as just kind of questions pop up in the chat, I'll address those as well. Okay, so question number 1. My child can't concentrate on Zoom calls, but that's what her school is using as a virtual classroom. How do I talk to her teacher about this? Is there anything to do? Well, first, what I would be wondering is what exactly is causing these distractions? Is it more so the video interface, as far as your child seeing other kids on the screen, like everybody's face is there, and so that's kind of shifting attention away from the teacher? Or is it more so that, just kind of the audio is distracting from their peers? Those sort of things are going to be quick fixes where you can just essentially ask the teacher to mute each child's mic unless they're speaking. And then there's also specific settings in Zoom where you can just kind of limit the amount of faces that are on the screen to just the person that's talking, and then it switches over to whoever is speaking automatically. Another kind of problem, though, that you can have that can be a little bit more challenging is when, just it being a video interface, just the fact that it's not engaging enough for kids. Now, this is a very common problem. Even adults are struggling with this. Other students and just kind of parents, I would imagine, have probably frequent complaints with putting a child in front of a screen where they're maybe watching something that's really not that much of interest to them. And, with teachers, I'm just kind of thinking too, you've got students that are turning off their cameras. So in essence, you can't even see what they're doing or what they look like. And then they're, venturing on other websites and stuff kind of during your classes, and that there's just kind of not much participation. So if those are kind of the things that are going on, then I would want to kind of break this up into 2 different types of solutions. One, what is it that you can do at home? So first and foremost, always wanting to make sure that when your child is doing, just this distance learning and is online, that your child is in a quiet space. Now this space might be private, like for instance, your child's bedroom, if you think that that will help them focus. But if putting your child in a room where you can't see them is a problem, like for instance, that you just kind of know they're going to venture off, turn on the TV and try and multitask while they're doing this, then you may want to put them in more of a centralized space, like for instance, in a dining room or kitchen or even a living room. That way you can keep tabs on them to just make sure that they're actually staying focused and doing their work and not doing other things. What you can also do too is look into installing apps that reduce distractions. There are plenty of apps online. Some are free, others you have to pay for. Some examples are like self-control and stay focused. Some of these apps too will just depend on the type of computer you have, whether it's going to be more so the Windows format or it's going to be like a Mac. And these can, one, monitor your child's activity while they're on the computer, as well as limit their access to other websites and screens so that they are just focused on the Zoom calls. Well, Hunter, looks like we've got a question from Hunter, and he is asking, I've been reading about summer slide and possibly learning loss during this extended time away. Is this true? What can I do to help? Okay, Hunter. Well, this is definitely true. All across the country, we've got kids that are staying home and doing this kind of distance online learning. And kind of the quality of that learning is very variable right now. We've got some families doing more than others. The quality of work is different. And we've got kids that are not necessarily continually progressing through the curriculum. They're more so getting assignments that are just helping to try and retain like what's already been learned. So, this time away can be very similar to kind of a summer break in the sense that kids start to kind of forget material. What I would suggest is, when it comes to just general learning principles, what we do well with is just repeated instruction. And so, from now until your kids do go back to school, set aside, designated days, and even just kind of brief 20, 30-minute intervals of time to just continually practice the material. And this will make it easier that, for once they do go back into the classroom, to kind of pick up where they left off without your teacher having to spend so much time trying to just review a lot of the material that they covered this past academic year. I hope that helps. Thanks for your question, Hunter. So I'm actually going to transition just back to my question because I had a couple more points that I wanted to cover just about, just difficulty concentrating during the Zoom calls and, this parent wanting to know how to address this with the teacher. So we talked about just installing apps that reduce distractions. Another thing is thinking about what exactly we can then ask for teachers to do. So some suggestions for teachers that maybe you can make is dividing that class time and reducing the amount of instruction based and making it more activity based. And this would just kind of encourage students to be more active participants in the class rather than just kind of sitting there and listening to the teacher, which, your child may more likely zoom or zone out because of that. As well as too, for different types of instruction that just really isn't going to work with that type of a format, encouraging teachers to encourage participation through using the chat box. That way, you're just kind of throwing out questions and then making sure that kids are still focused because they've got to be able to answer things in the chat. And the way that you could kind of open this conversation with a teacher could be, just saying, my child is having difficulty concentrating, and I'm wondering if you can incorporate any of the following, strategies into your lessons, and then just kind of lay them out there and just kind of see what happens. So hope that was helpful. All right. Let's see what's kind of coming through, if we have any other additional questions. All right. Our next question from Anne. She wants to know, how many hours of live instruction do you recommend for my kid? All right. So this is going to be a tough question to answer. Some of this is going to be based on just what the school is providing, and I can't give you specific kind of recommendations based off of that, because that's going to really be dictated by your school. I also don't know how old your kid is, but what we just know from children is that the younger they are, the more difficult they have when it comes to just kind of sitting still and paying attention and listening, versus older kids who can just kind of tolerate more time. I think regardless of how much live instruction that they are given, I would just kind of want to be thinking about my time intervals, because people can only, even adults, sit for so long and listen to something without needing sufficient breaks. And when a child is younger, they need a lot more breaks, 20 minutes, maybe even less than that, 10 minutes of watching and then a break. Sometimes this may even happen to even when they're in the midst of a live instruction. You may just kind of have to pull them aside and have them take a break. So just being mindful of that even if your child is in the midst of live instruction, that doesn't mean that they don't still need a break. All right, another question. Aaron wants to know, how can I support my kids when they refuse to work? Oh, and you've got an 8-year-old. Uh-oh. Well, isn't that quite the challenge that many families are dealing with? One thing that I'm thinking about is rewards. And work right now for them is definitely something that they don't want to do, but there are plenty of other things that I'm sure they do want to do. And so what you want to try and do is pair those two things together, an undesirable task with something that's more desirable. And so you can create these kind of if-then scenarios, if you do 10 minutes of work or 2 worksheets, you can then watch, 20 minutes of TV, 30 minutes or something like that. Now you have to make sure, if you're setting up an if-then type of a scenario, that you don't just give them the reward, which was the TV or the tablet or something else like this, in the absence of this, them actually doing their schoolwork. Because if you think about it, if you're just going to give it to them anyway, then there's really no sort of motivation on their part to want to do the work. They know that they'll eventually just get it. So some of these rewards could be things like maybe you making their favorite dish to eat, playing with toys, screen time, and with them having difficulty as far as wanting to do their work, we want to also try and compromise as best as possible, just to make sure that those time demands and what exactly it is that you're asking them to do is just kind of realistic. And so we kind of start with the bar being a little bit low, getting a buy-in from them to want to do the work and do the assignments, and then you kind of gradually increase that, right? So if it's maybe one worksheet just for now, and then it's, one worksheet, and then you add another worksheet on top of that, or something like that. So I hope that helps. But just please know, Erin, that you're not alone. There are so many families right now that are dealing with this, where their kids are just like, no, thank you. All right, here's another question. What do you think about sharing COVID news with elementary age kids? I want to answer questions, but not give too much. I think that that's a great idea. Elementary age kids already know that something's going on, right? They're accustomed to going to school on a daily basis, just the bare bones of school and the fact that they're home, let alone the fact that, every time family members are leaving the house, they're wearing masks and gloves. And much has changed in these past few weeks. So I would absolutely share information with kids. You can definitely open it up by just asking them how much they know about COVID and the coronavirus, and have they ever heard about it? And then build from there. And you're absolutely right with the fact of not giving too much information. I had mentioned in my last video, gave some just kind of general tips about how to talk to kids about the coronavirus, and how to have these conversations. One thing you do is you want to try and be initially as like brief and succinct as possible, because that gives the child an opportunity then to control how much information they hear. Right? If you start short and small, then if that's all they want to hear, then that'll be the end of it. Whereas if they want to know more, then they can ask questions and learn more, and just make yourself available to them, to have these conversations, because this is an ever evolving situation, and it's ongoing. And so you're going to just kind of have ongoing questions from them. All right. Any tips for a 15-year-old with total lack of motivation? I can't get him out of bed before 3 p.m. despite repeated asks. Oh, I'm so sorry for this. All right. So there's a couple of things going through my mind. One is, kind of what's the cause for the lack of motivation, as well as what was previously a motivating factor for him before. Just kind of going off of history, trying to find some motivating reinforcers for him, and doing, as I mentioned, kind of pairing things that a child doesn't want to do with things that they do want to do, trying to kind of find that compromise and balance. Now, if he's not getting out of bed before 3, what this makes me believe is that he's likely also staying up very late at night. And so even though he's 15, he may be also needing to enforce a stricter bedtime. A bedtime that means, no TV, no video games, no cell phone. But if you're finding that those are the things that he's doing either during the day, up at night, you want to remove access to that. I mean, getting him on a schedule is going to be very important, and sticking with that schedule, and then introducing rewards and motivators to kind of get him to stick to that schedule. I also want to remind families out there too that in addition to all of the wonderful content that we're putting out there through our Facebook Lives and all of our kind of digital channels and content, that we also have wonderfully trained clinicians who can help provide consultative services, or kind of even more in-depth ongoing counseling services for families as well. So you can kind of reach out to us for those things too, if you need kind of more specific, kind of tailored recommendations and support. Right. What's the best way to communicate with teachers about a lack of communication? I know they're getting used to this format, but they aren't there in the same way. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think that this is definitely just an adjustment for all parties involved, including teachers. And there's also an aspect of this where we need to be realistic about what sort of expectations we have for teachers and just kind of that learning environment. Unfortunately, they're not in that traditional format where they're in class, 8 hours a day or so, and teachers can devote 100% of their time to your child. So I think that's one of the main sources of the problem there, is just that we're in a completely different format. And just also consider too that teachers have children and other family members to care for, and so they might not be able to have that kind of presence for long amounts of time. But I think also if your child needs extra support, that it would be a good idea to, send them an email. If you have their phone number, call them and just kind of have a conversation about what sort of ways communication can be increased if there's, just difficulty as far as clarification with assignments and stuff, but also just keeping in mind and wanting to have realistic expectations for just kind of those limitations with kind of what everybody is dealing with right now. Okay, great questions, guys. A lot of remote schoolwork is assigned early in the day with the expectation that a fourth grader can stay on schedule by herself for the rest of the day. Any tips? Okay. I would say first and foremost, every child is different, but also too, just thinking about somebody that has a fourth grader, I could absolutely see how that would be very unrealistic. So I think that just first and foremost, that expectation, that bar may be too high right now. And once again, teachers aren't in the home with you guys, and so they also are missing an aspect of how much has changed from that traditional environment where you kind of give all these things out and there's just somebody either directly in front of them or in the periphery keeping an eye on them, versus now where families have to work and there's just kind of other things going on. So I would say, emailing the teacher and just kind of discussing what sort of challenges you're facing, as well as, letting them know what you think is going to be realistic, because everybody's household is different. But I would say if you can't meet the expectations that that is being put out, I mean, don't force it. I mean, life is already hard enough, so just don't force it. All right, so it looks like that's kind of the end of our time today. I want to thank you guys all again for joining me. I hope it was helpful. And remember, we're here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30, and we look through your questions daily. Check out the post for the next topic of our Facebook Live. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultations to gold standard telehealth treatments. Go to childmind.org/coronavirus. Be safe and thank you.